Welcome to the Living While Loving Your Child Through Addiction podcast, formerly known as Living with Your Child's Addiction. Here, we focus on self care as we tend to our own lives while also extending love and compassion to our kids. This podcast offers science backed skills to bring hope and healing to your entire family. In the last episode, we explored why our kids can do some things incredibly well, like playing chess and tracking gas prices, but struggle with what we consider basic tasks, like getting ready for an appointment or making a simple phone call. We talked about how substance use affects the brain and why those inconsistencies make sense when we look at brain function instead of behavior alone. Today, we're shifting gears. Now that we understand what's happening in the brain, how do we work with it? How do we stop resisting that reality and instead use the existing capabilities that our kids have to help them move forward? One way to move forward is shifting our perspective on capability. When we only look at what our child struggles with, it can feel hopeless. But instead of measuring them by what they can't do, let's focus on what they can do and build from there. Ask yourself, are they able to focus on certain activities? Do they show critical thinking skills in specific areas? Are they able to engage when something is personally meaningful to them? These preserved strengths can be leveraged to help them develop new skills over time. The key here is time and patience. Their brain isn't functioning optimally right now, but that doesn't mean they aren't capable of change. We just need to meet them where they are instead of where we wish they were. I'm going to share a couple of examples of how you can work with your child's capabilities instead of resisting them. But first, just a little warning. You might hear these ideas and immediately think this won't work. I've tried everything and nothing has helped. That's a natural reaction, but I encourage you to stay open to a new perspective on what's truly helpful. It's easy to lose hope in a situation this difficult. Think of what I'm sharing today as just one piece of a larger, balanced approach to supporting your child. In my Peace of Mind group coaching program, I'm teaching the 9 craft procedures. Each one on its own might not seem like a game changer, but together they create a powerful, well rounded way to support someone's progress. It's like building a house. You can't do it with just a hammer. That doesn't mean the hammer is ineffective. It just means you need the right combination of tools. The same is true for supporting your child. No single strategy is going to make a huge difference, but when you use a combination of tools and think of it like a science experiment. You're just trying to figure out what works. If it didn't work, you just learned what didn't work and you try something else. But when you use all these tools together, then you create a solid foundation for change. So, the first thing I'm going to talk about is just helping them make a phone call. Something as simple as making a phone call, whether to a doctor, a therapist, or even to ask about a job, can feel overwhelming to them because the prefrontal cortex, where the thinking and reasoning happens, is weakened. And that makes it hard to plan, initiate, and follow through on tasks. The amygdala, the emotional center, is heightened. So, anxiety about talking to someone or messing up can lead to avoidance. And if there's no immediate reward, their brain doesn't prioritize it. Here's what might work instead: break it down into smaller steps. Instead of saying, like, just call the doctor, you could say, let's find the phone number together, or let's write down what you want to say when you call. Or would you like to practice saying what you will say when you call the doctor before you call? You could also try making it a when then task. When you finish coffee, let's make this call together. You could also use external accountability. Like sometimes texting a reminder isn't enough, but you could offer to sit with them while they do it to reduce that emotional overwhelm. You can also positively reinforce their effort by acknowledging and celebrating it. Even if they don't complete the call, you can say, you found the number today. That's progress. You're building momentum with them, and that is more important than that instant success. And patience, again, is required here. And some of you listening might be struggling, thinking that you have these fears of doing too much or doing things for people that they can do for themselves. But those fears come from stigma and one size fits all thinking, and it's all around us. I really struggled with this in Helena's early recovery. Things like dealing with medical insurance and doctor's appointments were a big barrier for her. She was overwhelmed by it, and I was struggling to find my balance with helping her while also dealing with those voices in my head that said I was doing too much. And I felt just this constant tug of war about what I should be doing. Now, to be fair to me, at the time, I was also going through breast cancer and struggling with my own health. And we had this huge mess with our insurance because a doctor at the treatment center had ordered a medication for Helena without her saying that she wanted to switch to that medication. So then the insurance wouldn't cover the medication that she needed to continue taking. And normally, if I hadn't been going through breast cancer, I probably would have gotten more involved. But because I didn't get that involved, she ended up going to the county health department to get free Suboxone. And every week, she had to ride the bus there. And it took the majority of the day, one day, every week. And that was another barrier. That led to her leaning off of her Suboxone, which was a life saving medication for her, medication that could have prevented the relapse that led to her overdose and passing away. And I can't help but wonder, like, what if I had planned out how she could call the insurance company to try to get things straightened out so that she could get her Suboxone from a local pharmacy? That would have been so much easier. It could have reduced so many barriers for her when she was already overwhelmed by early recovery. If I had to teach her those skills as a young adult, which she was a young adult, she was only 21 or 20, I guess, during this at this time. But if I had to teach her those skills as a young adult, one who had never struggled with substance use, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. It's the stigma about helping someone with an addiction that made it feel so different to me, that made it feel wrong. She was just a young woman who had never done these things before and needed help learning how to navigate the world. Like she had been living seemingly outside of society since she was a sophomore in high school. Like she just didn't have the normal experiences that other kids her age had, and she needed extra support. I also have to acknowledge this other self awareness I'm having about this. Part of me was still thinking of Helena like the old Helena that she was before she started substance use. And things were going through that filter because when she was younger, she really didn't need that much help. She was very determined, always figured things out. And so I was still looking at her like that way too, not this young woman who had really been struggling for the last several years and didn't have any of these skills. So, the reason I'm sharing that is because I want you to be aware if you're thinking that these things are wrong. I want you to be aware of why you're thinking that. I want you to question those voices that tell you all helping is wrong and decide for yourself what is wrong or right for you and your family in each situation. And don't make that decision from fear. Decide from an intentional, empowering emotion instead. The suggestions that I made about helping somebody make a doctor appointment are steps to teaching them how to do things on their own, not doing things for them that they could do for themselves. Maybe they'd figure it out, but life sure is easier when somebody explains things to us. Number two, getting to an appointment on time. This one is huge. You give them plenty of notice, yet you still find yourself waiting 20 minutes while they get ready, or worse, you miss the appointment entirely. Why does this happen? Blindness, like I mentioned in the previous episode, which is difficulty perceiving or managing time, executive functioning challenges, struggling to plan steps and follow through, emotional resistance. Even if they want to go, they avoid the stress of getting there. What might work instead? You could try using visual cues. So instead of saying, we need to leave in 30 minutes, you could say, we're leaving when this show ends. That is attaching the time to something concrete. You could try reverse engineering the time that's needed, working backwards. So if the appointment is at 2, then we need to leave at 1:15. That means we need to get dressed by 1 or 12:30, however long you need to bake into that time frame. But breaking it into steps can help reduce overwhelm. You could suggest setting alarms, not just a single alarm, but multiple alarms. I mean, I do this for myself, but having that 30-minute warning, a 10-minute warning, a shoes on cue. You could also try removing last minute decision making. So if you know that figuring out what they're going to wear causes a lot of stress, maybe you could help them plan that the night before when their brain isn't feeling so overloaded with all the steps that are coming after that. Thinking about walking back through what steps need to happen before the appointment tomorrow. How can I help you get through those steps easier? You can also acknowledge that emotional resistance. Sometimes it's not just a planning issue, it's anxiety. If they're avoiding the appointment, help them talk about why. Is it fear of what's going to happen there? Maybe how they'll be treated. Maybe they've had bad experiences at appointments in the past. Is it the stress of talking to a professional in general? Just identifying the barrier helps with problem solving. And again, think of this like a science experiment. None of the things that I just mentioned might work for you. Some might make things worse. Maybe one will work and you can build on it, but just try to remain curious about what might work for you in your situation. Use that gold mine of information you have because you know your child better than anybody. And even if something hasn't worked before, you could always try it again. So when I used to go pick up Helena for appointments or even to spend time on her, I always adjusted my plan according to what we were doing. If I was picking her up for dinner, I just planned to wait 20 or 30 minutes for her to come out of the house. That was how it was. And if she came out sooner, then I was pleasantly surprised. That was just part of me spending time with her. I didn't resist it. I would just bring a book or listen to a podcast. If she had a doctor's appointment, I would remind her the night before. Then I would remind her the morning of. I never made appointments in the morning. I only made them like later in the afternoon, early evening, because we were more likely to make it that way. There's no way we would ever make it a morning appointment. I would get to her house an hour before we needed to leave. And rather than waiting in the car, I would wait inside of the house because I could physically go into her room to check on her rather than calling or texting, which helped reduce tension and conflict. Just that in person interaction rather than her getting stressed out by my calling and texting. That was what worked with Helena. And again, when I needed to take her to an appointment, in my mind, I was agreeing to all of these efforts. They were just part of the plan. I it didn't always work out and sometimes it was really frustrating, but I didn't take it out on her or lecture her when I was frustrated. I might talk to her about it after the fact when I had regulated myself. But when I was focusing on what I could control, I had a time boundary with myself, which was that I didn't agree to do something or plan things with her if I was going to be rushed, because I knew that then I was going to be uptight and I was going to be reactive instead of responding intentionally. Right. I can only control myself. So that was the boundary that I set with myself about time and making commitments. Number three, long term planning, like moving to another state or maybe just moving somewhere else in the same town. So let's say they're talking about moving and maybe they say, like, I just need a fresh start. I'm thinking about moving to this place, but they have no plan. They don't have any money, they don't have a job, and nothing but this desire to move. Instead of responding with what you're thinking in your head, like, you can't even get to an appointment on time. How are you going to move across town or out of state? Just recognize that they want something different, which is a good thing. Their brain is not wired for long term planning right now. So, what might work is helping them create short term steps. So, instead of saying that's unrealistic, you could say, what's the first thing you need to do? Or how much money do you think you need to save? Or what kind of job could you get there? If they didn't know the answers to any of these questions, you could ask if they're open to you offering suggestions. Asking permission to offer suggestions goes a long way and it increases the possibility that they might take your advice. You can also try breaking it into stages instead of jumping straight into moving. You could say, let's visit there first, or let's research the area and the jobs there, what the housing is like there. Or let's start by saving $200 this month. Do you think you could do that? So that helps their brain see progress and it starts to feel real to them instead of impossible. The closest thing I experienced to this with Helena was when she finished treatment and she moved into this apartment building that was owned by the treatment center while she did IOP. And she loved living there and having people around all the time. The place was really set up well for community. It was like a U shaped building, and there were some picnic tables in the middle. And she just loved having friends around to talk to. She was also always pretty social. But when IOP was over, she had to move out and she really didn't want to. And she had to find a sober living that would take her dog Honey and also accept someone who was on Suboxone. And it's a really tall order, at least in Florida, to find a sober living home that allows Suboxone and then a dog on top of it. She was scared, stuck. She wasn't taking action to find a place. In fact, she was like picking up extra shifts at work instead of looking for a place. And the clock was ticking. The treatment center and her therapist were calling me. And so I asked her if I could look for a place for her. I found a place. I sent it to her to check out and see if she liked it. She did. And then she got excited because I had removed that barrier for her and she started looking forward to the next phase of her life instead of dreading it. But then she needed a ride to get there. So I brainstormed with her, and 24 hours later, she had the ride worked out. Then we talked about how she was going to pay her rent and all of the costs of moving into the sober living home. While she was in IOP, she had worked and saved enough money to pay her rent on her own. I was very pleasantly surprised about that because I had been paying her rent during IOP. And there were other tasks involved in this move, but we went through them together. And she was just in such early recovery that she didn't have the capacity to do these things on her own. Again, I think it's important to know that I faced self doubt here. I was wondering if I was doing too much. If I knew then what I know now, what I would have done is surrounded myself with people who had a similar belief system about a more compassionate approach. It would have made things so much easier for me. It wasn't until after my daughter Helena passed away that I met all of these people who are using invitation to change and craft. I had only been studying it on my own before that. And when you're going against the grain of society that says tough love and rock bottom are the only way, you really need support staying this different course that's filled with so much doubt. So, if you're looking for your own support and community, you can join my Peace of Mind group coaching program for mothers. You will be surrounded by mothers who are all on the same path. You can sign up for a road to recovery call to find out more about the group and join. But the bigger picture about what this means is the brain can heal, and especially in recovery. These skills, planning, time management, emotional regulation, they can come back with practice and support. We don't have to force change. Instead of expecting them to function like someone who hasn't experienced substance use, we can meet them where they are and try to build momentum from there. And every little small success matters, whether it's making one phone call or being on time once or taking the first step towards a goal, it all adds up. So I urge you to challenge yourself to see your child's capabilities in a different way. If you're feeling frustration or fear about what I've shared, I just want to remind you that your child is capable, their brain will heal. You just have to shift your focus to start looking for their strengths so that you can leverage them instead of focusing on their deficits. Your son or daughter just needs the right kind of support. So instead of asking yourself, why don't they do whatever this thing is they're not doing? You could shift to asking something like, what strengths do they already have? How can I break this into smaller steps? What external supports can help reduce overwhelm and barriers? And when we stop seeing their struggles as defiance and start seeing them as a result of how their brain is functioning, our experience of them and our capability to help changes. We stop resisting and pushing against that wall and we start walking side by side with them at their pace and in a way that actually works. Thank you for listening to the podcast today. If you found this episode helpful, I'd love for you to take a moment to leave a 5-star review. Your feedback helps other parents find the support they need. If you're tired of feeling stuck, scared, and unsure of what to do next, a Road to Recovery call is where we can explore what's possible for you and your family with the support of somebody who truly understands. You do not have to navigate this alone. The Road to Recovery call link is in the show notes and on my website. Until next time, remember that taking care of yourself isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. You matter too.